like to simplify it and just say like, well, why do I care? And like a really good example is a conversation. I'm currently doing research on for all of the NBC figure skating events leading up to the Olympics. So I'm working on that as well. But one of the things when we were working on they're just bio packets, I was asking the person who's done this job before, like, well, what's at stake? You know, what are we talking about that's at stake here? And I think that's how I think about it. It's like, well, what am I feeding the commentators that they can help tell the story to the audience of what's at stake? And I think that's probably what I do in my documentary work as well, is just like help an audience member understand what's at stake.
Welcome to Over a Pint, where we focus on the fast-paced and ever-changing world of marketing told through the eyes of industry veterans with decades of in-the-trenches experience. No theory here. This is real-world, practical experience told to you by those that have been there, and that includes our guests. So grab a pint of your favorite local brewski or whatever your choice of drink may be, and join us for the show. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Pat McGovern, new biz director at Acedia, an award-winning digital shop here in Milwaukee. And I'm Kurt Lingle, Vice President at Celtic, a full-service ad agency headquartered in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward neighborhood. So Pat, for many reasons, I'm pretty excited about today's guests. Today we have Stacey Nash with us. Stacey is a documentary filmmaker specializing in commercial and long-form storytelling for broadcast and brands. Her range of credits, and specifically the variety of, are pretty darn impressive. The Olympics, shows on MTV and VH1, A&E's Accused, Guilty or Innocent, Harley Davidson, CarMax, Northwestern Mutual, JetBlue, Neutrogena, the list goes on and on and on, and are just a small sample of experience that you'll find in Stacey's buffet line of work. The Wall Street Journal has called her work strangely riveting. I actually think those are two very fun words that are strung together. And I think that's a compliment to Stacey's work, as it's a testament to her breakout style amongst a world so often filled with tons and tons of advertising and messaging clutter. Stacey defines herself as a director, producer, and creative who was at her best when bringing all three hammers to the table. It was when living and working in New York City that Stacey said she learned to be effective, scrappy, and excellent in her craft, but it's in Milwaukee where she learned to do all of this while being nice. And I know Stacey very well, and I will confirm firsthand, she is incredibly nice and super fun to hang with at an Oktoberfest event with a leader in hand. And on that note, Stacey, welcome to Over a Pint.
Well, thank you. That was a really nice intro, so thank you very much.
A well-deserved intro. So Stacey, we have a tradition here on the show. So it is called Over a Pint. So what we like to do is go around the horn and have everyone just share what they are drinking, whether it's a brew, tea, water, coffee, whatever it might be. You are our guest. What are you drinking, Stacey?
Well, this is the part that I was looking forward to. So my beer is a seasonal choice. It is Southern Tier Pumpkin. Wow. Oh yeah, this is a good one. It's a nice pumpkin beer, Imperial Pumpkin Ale.
Wow.
I'll crack it open for you.
Wow.
Cheers. I like that sound. Cheers to you.
Yeah.
Mr. McGovern, what do you got?
I'm going with a Kid Krolsch from New Glarus Brewing. Kid Krolsch. Very good.
Like good brewery.
Like all of their beers, they kill it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good brewery. So I'm going back to Waukesha with a brewery called Raised Grain Brewing Company. And if you watch the show on a regular basis, you might think that I'm being sponsored by this brewery because I drink so much of it. But the truth is I had one left in my fridge and it was begging me to drink it. But it's their Black Walnut Belgium Imperial Stout. It's really, really good. And I think it's fitting for the change in temperatures as we go to darker beers. So anyway, Stacey, Pat, cheers. Stacey, welcome to Over a Pint.
Cheers.
All right. So let's get this going here a little bit. So Stacey, As our guests, you're going to start off, you're in the hot seat, as all of our guests are, right out of the gate. And if you could, tell us briefly, who is Stacey Nash? What makes you tick? What do you do?
I love that question because it should be so easy to answer. But it's sort of like when you go to the therapist office and they say, like, well, why are you here? And you're like, oh, my God, I don't know where to start. But I think,
The beginning.
well, it's dark and stormy night in July. It would, I think what makes me tick is just like, I really just like to laugh with people and have a good time. And I just kind of try and like use that as my true north of like, life is short, let's have a good time. And everything else can kind of build from there. And as a professional, I think I just, it's so cliche at this point, but it's like, I like to call myself a storyteller, and in sort of whatever platform that might be, I like to tell stories, and I really like to tell stories about real people. And I just always try and make sure that if I'm taking a story, I'm telling it better than they could have done for themselves. And that's always my goal.
Oh, good answer. Well, let's talk about storytelling for a second. So everyone, as we know, has a story. I have a story. I might have a skeleton or two in my closet, but we all have stories. You have a story. Pat has a story. Companies have story. Brands have stories. Let's talk about the brand a little bit, because that's obviously where you really focus. How, in your opinion, you've been doing this for a while, how important is it for a brand to make a commitment to authentically share that story? And I want to underscore the word authentic, and whether that's shared with internal audiences, external audiences, influencers, whoever it might be, how important is it that a company makes a commitment to want to tell their story? Maybe that's a better way of asking the question.
I think you have to. If you're not committed to sharing your story and sharing why you exist in the first place, and like, what are you doing? I don't think there's a lot of brands that can get away with not sharing their story, unless you're, like a 100-year-old HVAC company that maybe doesn't really need to, but even those people should, and they do. And I do work for them. I think that you have to be pretty committed to it. I think the execution of that is a lot harder. I think that starts with really good research to find those stories that share the brand. I don't think it's really interesting to listen to a CEO talk about why he thinks it's important that the brand exists. I think it's important to hear from people who have benefited from the brand, but finding those stories, that takes a lot of research. And once you actually do find those people, then it's really important to be very smart with how you actually ask questions and making sure that you're giving them the space to answer the question in the best way possible. And so like as an interviewer, it's really important that for me that I'm succinct and that I ask a question that leaves them a lot of space to say, like, to answer the question. So many times people will ask a question for a brand and they're trying so hard to kind of get all the brand values into it that they almost tell the story for them. And then there's nowhere left for that person to go. And so I think that's a really, really key piece of how you make an authentic story. It's just like, it's the ingredient. It's like, I like to put vanilla in my pancakes, and it's what makes them taste really, really good. And my pancakes are unforgettable. And I like to think that like the way that you ask a question is the vanilla in the pancakes. That's what makes a story unforgettable, but it's allowing people that space to share their story. And I think that's how you find authentic content. It's research, and then it's asking the right questions.
That's a great answer. And Pat, I was thinking of you right away because one of your favorite things to say is, how do you make the sausage, right? You always, that's something you always say. So right away I was thinking of Pat. You kind of answered a little bit. My next question was, but I think you kind of got there. What's the balance? Because, Stacey, when in our business, whether it's through video, whatever it might be, in the world of advertising, we're trying to help brands authentically and tell their stories, and it's got to be done in a true and believable way, right? I can't be something that I'm not, so it's got to be true to me. But having said that, you just said it earlier, it's kind of like, but it can't be a CEO just reading something. There is some entertainment to this, and it's got to be fun and creative. So how do you balance that? Is it your process? Is that your strength as an interviewer, because you want truth and believability, but this is entertainment too.
Well, and this isn't really an answer to your question, but I think sometimes if like the story is not good enough, then like don't do it, because you should be entertaining. And if you don't have an entertaining story to tell, or you're only comfortable with the CEO telling your story and like he's not a good storyteller, well then maybe find a different path. Because what authentic means for a brand, maybe that's not necessarily a person telling their story. Maybe it's something else. So I think that like just finding what authentic is that's a different thing for everyone.
Stacey,
like
on
that
that
answer.
point, then, on that point, Stacey, have you had that experience where you get an assignment and it's, we want to tell a story about X, and you start digging in, it's like, there's no story here, guys, but there's Y's story over here. Did you guys ever think about going down this path? Have you had anything like that? And yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was working full time and I was an internal creative, I was able to, I mean, that's a fight, right? Like, unfortunately, that's like when somebody says, like, we think it's this, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of process that's gone into like what they think it is. And having a creative come in and say like, I think you guys are wrong. That's not an easy conversation to have. And so like when you're all working for the same company, it's a little bit easier because you know you're all getting paid by the same person. I think as a freelancer coming in, it's a tougher conversation to have. But if you can do it in a way that's effective and kind, like I learned in Milwaukee, I think it can be even more appreciated. And then you're a valued partner, not just like an executor. But yeah, definitely I've had those conversations.
So this is, Stacey, you've done, who's ever listening to this, please go to check out Stacey's website, take a look at some of her work. It's brilliant. In today's kind of marketing world, Stacey, storytelling is thrown around all the time. I mean, it is so overused. I'm a storyteller that's passionate about X. I find that very, very few people really tell good stories and or brands. Where do most people or organizations, where do they fall short?
Trust. I think they fall short in trust, of just like trusting a creative who comes in and says like, have you thought about it this way? I think there's also a huge, I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but I think if you have somebody who's the decision maker who doesn't understand the landscape that content's going to live in, they're not going to be able to make good choices. Because if you've got someone who's making decisions who's never opened up Twitter or really doesn't understand the YouTube algorithms, it's going to be hard to hear feedback that says like, well, this story probably isn't going to work in the social space because of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's a problem. I think that you just need to like, if you hire people because you think they're good, you should also trust them and trust their opinions.
You know, the one thing I want to add, and I don't want to overplay this, but you know, we were talking about you being nice. You know, I mean, and I will say this too. It's kind of in our business, there is something to be said about personality. You know, and you said it, Stacey. Trust is a key word. If they trust you, if they like you, so much of what we do is about the how, not just the what. You know, and I can see that with, you know, what, to our listeners, what you're seeing with Stacey is very genuine. I know Stacey, she is a nice person and a very nice person. So what you're seeing is how she really is in real life. So I can see that personality trait of yours probably has helped you quite a bit in your career. Because you can have two people. I mean, someone could be just as equally as talented as Stacey, but if you're just a son of a, you know what? I mean, right?
I would say it's helped a lot. I think that the people that I work with, they really do trust me and they like what I bring to the table. But I'm also not shy. And if I'm going to share my opinion, I'm going to share my opinion, which has definitely not worked. You know, that has definitely worked against me in certain cases. But, you know, it's okay. I think that one of the things, like as a freelancer, I think as anything, is it is important to be working with and for people who like and respect you, because if they don't, you probably shouldn't be there because you're probably never going to get along. It's probably always going to be miserable. Yeah.
No, I want to clarify. You're absolutely right. You know, you are a nice person, but you also, I've had many conversations with you. You're smart and you have a strong perspective and you have a strong point of view on things when we're having conversations. And that is what clients need from a brand advisor. Yes. Let's talk about video a little bit, because that's kind of where, that's your stage, if you will. That's kind of where you like to perform and bring stories to life. What was it about video? I mean, how, we can tell stories in a variety of ways. What captured your love, your passion for the art of video?
I mean, I can tell you exactly the moment where I was like, oh, I'm going to do this. I was a figure skater and I loved figure skating, but I was like a very bad figure skater. I wasn't great at it. But through connections, when I was living in New York, I ended up becoming a runner for ABC Sports and their figure skating coverage. And I was just so excited because I had this backstage pass for figure skating and I was up close and personal with all the skaters. I was working with the broadcast team. Like, it was just the coolest thing. But all I cared about was the skating. And at one point, I remember during my first event, during the weekend, I just remember like being overcome by like, what is all this going on around me? And like, what is this broadcast thing? And everyone's so like hyped because it's live and it was so exciting and the energy was just so cool. And I just kind of felt like, oh, I found my people. Like, this is where I want to be. I don't really care about the skating anymore. I want to be part of this group. I want in this club. And it was literally at that moment that I was like, this is me. This is who I am and this is what I want to do. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know what the road is. I don't know what role I want to play, but that was how I got in. And shortly after that event, I ended up getting hired full-time by MTV to work in their library. I mean, I started at the basement, but I got in. And that was the most important thing. I got in, and from there, I never stopped working, and I just kept working my way up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's a nice transition, because obviously you have a very impressive background. So you had mentioned figure skating. I'd be remiss if I didn't say you've touched a lot of cool things in your career. One of which was the Olympics. It's one of those things. All the things you've done are very cool. But when you say Olympics, right, it's like you get people's attention. Like, wow, the Olympics. That's pretty cool. You've been involved in a string of Olympics. I mean, going back quite a bit to the current and also going forward to the Winter Games in Beijing. Talk to us about how that all started. How did you get into the Olympics? How many have you done? What do you do for the Olympics? Just talk about that, because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So the Olympics, I, as a kid, was obsessed with the Olympics. Like, it was my favorite thing in the world. And even as an adult, I remember, I think I was working for VH1 at the time, and an Olympics was going on, and I had signs all over my little cube area that said, like, these are my high holy weeks. No one speak to me about results. I didn't want it to be ruined on anything. And I really, really wanted to work for the Olympics because I'd worked for ABC. I understood kind of that sports broadcasting world. I knew a few people, but the Olympics were on NBC, and I didn't really know enough people. But I chased that job for many years, and I just couldn't find my way in. And I was living in New York at the time, and I had been chasing it. I had been like laid off from my last job that I had there. And I was just sort of thinking, I'm going to change something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to change something. It's either going to be, I get this job with NBC or I move. And I chose to move, and I moved back to Milwaukee because I got a full-time job offer here. The day that I signed the papers, or I put an offer on a condo in Milwaukee, 10 minutes after that offer was sent through, NBC emailed me, and I had a BlackBerry at the time. My BlackBerry buzzes, and I just happened to look at it, and it was a full-time job offer from NBC. And I had to really make the decision of oh my God, this has been my dream for so long, but I was done with New York. And I'm like, I can't do this. So luckily, best of both worlds, I was able to move back to Milwaukee, and they said, well, that's fine if you don't want to take this full-time job. Are you interested in being a producer for the digital side of gymnastics? Yes. Please, very much. Thank you. So that was how I got in. It was, they had this role. It was just basically a seasonal Olympic job. And so I just worked the month that the Olympics were going on. And I was a digital producer for gymnastics, which meant that I created a bunch of online content. So we did videos for the site. I did a lot of blogs for the site, tons and tons of endless building photo galleries where you have little captions talking about each thing because you want to encourage click through. So it was just creating digital content for the Olympics on that one sport. So I did that for 3 years, 2008, 10, and 12. And then when I went back last year for Tokyo, I was the researcher for the live broadcast. So I would help prepare packets of information for the commentators. And then during the broadcast, I would sit on headset with the commentators and help them if they missed anything, if there was something going on in a different camera that they weren't seeing, if there were scores that they needed to know about. When the story of Simone Biles broke, that was me feeding that information to the commentators, which was terrifying. So that's what I did. That's what I'll do. I'll do for Beijing. I've been hired again, but I'm going to be working as like a researcher writer for the show Olympic Ice, which is a daily recap show for figure skating. So that's what
very
I'll do.
cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very cool.
Stacey, I am really fascinated and want to get your perspective on you. And that is you go to New York City, you're busting ass trying to get into not just a competitive space. I mean, super competitive, right?
Yes.
I mean, and you've gone on to do so many things. You've got that, Kurt, what was the line from Wall Street Journal?
Riveting. Strangely riveting.
Okay. I mean, you get a quote about.
I like that, actually.
Right? Stacey, in your words,
That's cool.
what has been able to separate you from the other filmmakers that are out there? Like, how would you crystallize it down going, this is what I bring?
I think that's such a hard question because I feel like I have to constantly verbalize that in order just to get work. And I feel like what I'm able to do is flex between so many different platforms and different ways of telling stories and different people. I think that as a freelancer, especially in this industry, it's really important to kind of be a little bit of a chameleon and blend into your surroundings. And I think that I'm able to do that because I work with so many different types of people. Broadcast people are not like agency people. Documentary people are not like commercial people. It's a different vibe. It's a different feel. They talk about it differently. And I think it's important to be able to kind of slip into those worlds. Bring what you can and bring what bring your best self to the table, but also understand how you fit in.
Gotcha.
You know what?
And you,
go ahead, Pat. No, I was just going to say, just because it's kind of on that a little bit, your range is so there's nothing vertical about it. I mean, I know there's probably a sweet spot, and I know there's probably one that you really love, and I kind of know which one that might be, but you just nailed it. I mean, you are touching from traditional commercials, brand documentaries, true crime documentaries, broadcast, sports foundations. I mean, you're touching them all, and I guess you were saying you're kind of a chameleon. Was that by accident that happened? You just kind of figured out, I have to kind of do this to be whatever, or was it kind of intent where it's like, you know what, I'm going to get good at a number of different things. I'm just kind of, because it is very diverse, and you look at your portfolio, you're touching a lot of stuff.
I don't know that I set out to try and do that. I think it became, look, I live and work in Milwaukee. And I think that as a director, there are limited opportunities here. And we can, that's a whole other discussion of like what that should be in Milwaukee. But the reality is there's only so much. And so I think that if you want to work and you want to be successful and you want to tell different stories, you have to go find those opportunities for yourself. And so, I've been freelance for 4 years now, and I've really worked hard to seek out those opportunities. And I haven't shied away from trying new things. Like this true crime documentary kind of came out of the blue thin air. This tongue king is really getting to me. But that was a pretty terrifying prospect. I'm working with a UK company, so it's a BBC style of filming and shooting, which is surprisingly very different. The way that they approach their stories is very different. But you have to just try and just slip in and, see what you can take from it. And it's not going to all be like enjoyable, but you'll learn something. And I think that's what I take from every experience. It's like, all right, what am I learning from this that I can take to something that I maybe will enjoy more?
Stacey, what's different about the BBC way?
Oh my God, they're so quiet. They love to like lock down a shot. And the first time I saw the DP doing that, I was like, what are you, like, move around, like, go be interesting, move your camera. And I kind of realized that like they let the story breathe in a way that like we just don't over here. I think especially in brand work, there's just not time, we got to cut out those 5 seconds where no one said anything. But the BBC style is they just like sit and let the story breathe and let it kind of like get into your brain and get into your blood a little bit. And I love it. And it's changed now how I want to approach things.
Interesting. You know, just getting back a little bit to how the sausage is made, Stacey, I got something
Told you
I would love to get. I'd love to get your opinion of. You know, when I studied writing in college a million years ago, you know, some of the basic storytelling is, well, the hero of the story has got to go up against something, right? That might be an internal conflict. That might be something outside, right? Is he going to get the girl? Is he going to kill the monster? What's going to happen, right? And you have to have that foil in order to make a good story. In your world, when you're creating stories, what are some of the must-haves that you look for and or that probe for to see if you can get to that, right? It might not be on the surface, but you got to dig down there. What are those things? It's like, okay, when I know I've got this and this, I got gold. What are those things?
So I went to school for theater, and I've never actually taken a writing class. So there's a lot of stuff of like formal education and like the formal like process and way that you would tell a story that I frankly just don't know. There's a lot of stuff that I've kind of picked up, and maybe just intuition I've just kind of figured out for myself. But when people talk about like the acts of a play, and I understand, I get it, but I don't necessarily think that way. I like to simplify it and just say like, well, why do I care? And like a really good example is a conversation. I'm currently doing research on for all of the NBC figure skating events leading up to the Olympics. So I'm working on that as well. But one of the things when we were working on they're just bio packets, I was asking the person who's done this job before, like, well, what's at stake? What are we talking about that's at stake here? And I think that's how I think about it. It's like, well, what am I feeding the commentators that they can help tell the story to the audience of what's at stake? And I think that's probably what I do in my documentary work as well, is just like help an audience member understand what's at stake. I think that's
awesome.
that's how I think about it.
Cool.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and it might sound like a cliche type of question, and you cannot answer. That's a hard question to answer.
Okay.
And you can't say I don't know.
Okay.
Which I don't think you will. And then the second part of the question, you may not want to answer, but you might. How's that? That's like,
I love this.
Where did I go with
that?
that? That's not so. Okay, here's my question. Yeah, I know. Well, I don't want to.
Like it's going to be a HIPAA violation.
It's not that great of a question. So now I don't want to exceed.
Oh, for sure, HIPAA.
So here's my question. So in your career, name one or two pieces of work you're most proud of, milestones, and then is there a project or whatever it might you want to call it that you'd like to have another crack at? So one that you're really proud of, it's like, you know what, this one really stands out. I know they're all great, but which one stands out? But if you could go back and you could take another crack at a project, which one would it be if you feel comfortable answering that, and why?
Okay, so this is actually pretty easy. The project that I'm most proud of, hands down, is a piece that I did for the Northwestern Mutual Childhood Cancer Foundation. Our president of the foundation, John Kordsmeyer, my hero. I love that guy. He did so many wonderful things for me. He came to me and he said, look, I am tired of going on these presentations and talking about childhood cancer to colleges and just looking like an old, out of touch white guy. He said, I want to look cool. Can you make me a Green Day video that talks about childhood cancer? And I was like, no, but let me go think about that. So I understood the assignment. I understood his goal is he just doesn't want to be out of touch. He doesn't want to make something that's just like sad. He wants to be able to touch an audience that maybe is wondering why he's talking to them in the first place. So what I came up with is a Rube Goldberg machine that told the story of how childhood cancer impacts not just the child, but also the family and what that need for research is. And so with a team of other people, we came up with, I think I wrote the script over beers with a producer. So we wrote the script. We hired an actual Rube Goldberg expert to kind of help us think about the overview of it. And then we hired some students from MSOE and a couple of props guys to help us build a Rube Goldberg. So I had a script that talked about how childhood cancer impacts these families. And then we picked toys that kind of symbolically also told that story. I'm still so proud of that piece. It was very, very difficult, but it was, it felt like it really hit a home run.
I would agree. That was that I watched that
That's
today.
awesome.
It was awesome.
Thank you.
And the machine, the whole storytelling aspect of it is really cool.
Yeah, thank you. That was good. The one that I would like to have another crack at is actually, it was another piece that I did for Northwestern Mutual. It was a client story that we did. I was called in for a meeting with one of our VPs at Northwestern Mutual, which wasn't very normal that he would just go directly to me and said, I have a thing. I need you to figure out how to tell this story of a man who's dying. He is very thankful to Northwestern Mutual for the life insurance that he knows his family is going to have, because he knows he doesn't have much time, and he's willing to share his story. Can you go down there in a couple of weeks and go get this story for us? And so we went down. At the time, Travis was still pretty healthy, but he had cancer that was through his body, and like he knew it wasn't going to be very long. We got there literally the day before he got really, really sick. But I had asked for this background that we were kind of trying something. And this background was kind of in my head of like what I wanted, but I didn't fully think it out. And like, we didn't really do a very good job of it. And so we have this beautiful story that's told against a terrible background. And that's what I want to change. I want to go back and I want to change that background, because I feel like it took away a little bit from like this thing that this man was willing to do and share with us. I just don't feel like we fully thought that background out.
Fair enough.
Gotcha.
Fair enough.
You know, Stacey, when I was younger, documentary films and documentary filmmakers was like was just a kind of an oddity. It has totally become mainstream. Maybe the Ken Burns thing. There's just so many great films that are out there. What are some of your favorites? I'd just love to know that. Like, who are people that's like, check out this, or this one really inspired me, or whatever.
My all-time favorite documentary is Conan O'Brien Can't Stop. It is so good. It is so raw. It is so authentic. He invited a filmmaker to come along with him on his legally prohibited from being on TV tour that he did when he was kicked off of NBC. Mm-hmm. And it is like, it's not a flattering picture of Conan O'Brien, but it's amazing to have this glimpse into what he was going through at that period of his life, and who the people that were around him and how he was feeling. It's super raw, and I love it. I've probably watched it 50 times. My other favorite one is LCD Sound System. Shut Up and Play the Hits. That's my other favorite one, because it just juxtaposes what it's like to be a rock star on the last night of the greatest concert of your life, which is when they retired in. And then the next day where he's just like brushing his teeth with his dog who wants to go outside. It's amazing.
You know what's amazing is just hearing the two of you kind of go back and forth, how mediums just kind of reinvent themselves. You know, I mean, it is. I mean, when you think about, if you think about video, and like Pat, kind of like you were saying, like how it's kind of changed into something that is, I don't want to say, I don't know what the right word is, but it's mainstream, whatever, but it's being used so differently and creatively. But, think about like, years ago, TV commercials, it almost became like archaic, right? After a while, it's like TV commercials. But now look how video is being used, and it's being used just in so many different ways. It's become much more affordable and accessible to people, and I think it's just kind of cool how you see in our business and whatever, just things kind of reinvent themselves and change. And I think this is a good example. So
yeah.
Stacey, is there based on your craft, what you do, is there an industry out there, a category that just isn't getting it with storytelling? And it's like, gosh, if I could, is there one that's just, they need help. They need a dose of Stacey. Is there an industry out there that just, boy, they don't know how to tell stories? What's your thought?
Yes. I don't know if it's an industry necessarily, but I think that it's, there are a lot of companies out there that haven't had to do much advertising, and they haven't had to tell their stories. And they're primarily like an engineering focused organization, and they've promoted within, and now there's an engineer that's ended up as the CMO. And I think that those are the industries that could probably use some help, because I think it's hard. it's difficult to communicate with someone who has an engineer background and help them understand something that's like very gray when they want to see something very black and white. And for the most part, they're incredibly nice, wonderful people to work with, but it's sometimes very difficult to sell them on things that they maybe should be doing or thinking about. I think that's I don't know what the answer is there, but I think that's the industry that like I would love to get my hands on more of, just helping those people in those roles understand the possibility, because they usually have money and they usually have things to spend. And it's like if they could put a little bit of like effort and work into it, I think they could have a really, really fascinating product and have fun with it too.
And have fun with it. Yeah.
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 Stacey, how do you market yourself? You're a freelancer. Obviously, you were saying when you were in New York, you were hustling and knocking on doors to get into NBC. So, as a freelancer, there's still that normal sales cycle, however you want to call it. You want new clients. How do you market yourself? How do you approach finding new clients?
Yeah. I mean, when I first went freelance, I was relentless, probably having 2 or 3 meetings a day for about 6 months. I mean, I just would sit down and talk with anyone. And a lot of it was going through the process of trying to figure out what my elevator pitch is. Who am I? How do I want to talk about myself? And that was a huge part of what I was doing in those 6 months, was just, how do I speak about myself? How do I figure out what you want so that I can then tell you what I have that can help you? So I did a lot of that, and it was just trial and error, I mean, one of the best conversations I probably had was with the creative director, who was listening to me and talk about like what I was doing. And he was like, honestly, like, I don't know how I would use you. Like, you're kind of a director, you're kind of a producer, you're kind of a writer, but like, I don't need all 3. I just need 1. And I was like, oh, okay. So I have to change how I talk to every single person that I sit down with. I got it. And I have, if I'm sitting down with you and I know that you're in advertising and that you're only going to hire me as a director, I only talk to you about my directing work. If you're corporate, I will talk to you about the fact that I can do everything. If you're broadcast, I'm only going to talk to you about my broadcast experience, because it's what works, And my website, it's a huge piece of how I market myself too, making sure that that's current and that it's interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's a typical day for Stacey Nash?
It is. I mean, it really is so all over the place. I mean, today.
Give it to us.
Oh my gosh, what did I do today? Today, I was working on a pitch for a potential new project. Then I spent, I think, like 4 or 5 hours working on stuff for NBC, doing research for them. Had a call for another potential pitch that we're working on. Had to call a production company to see like if they could actually be working on it. After we get off this call, I'm going to spend another probably 4 to 5 hours editing a documentary project that I'm working on with an art museum. So like that's a typical day for me. It's like a total mix of like working on new business and actually working on the things that I've gotten hired to do. But you can't ever let up on that new business thing, because it takes a lot of swings.
It does.
You just mentioned research. You spend a lot of time doing research for the Olympics coming up.
Yeah.
How do you know, Stacey, when you're done researching? How do you know? At what point it's like, okay, I have enough, or
yeah. I was actually just having a conversation with the head of research at NBC, and he was like, yeah, like, you'll never be done. You can keep going and going and going. It is up to you to know when to stop. So that's the answer. It's like, I only have this much time. So when I'm done is when I'm out of time. I'm not actually done. I could go on forever. Although sometimes there is a random skater from like a random country you've never heard of, and you just literally can't find anything, and so you just quit. They're like, they're 21. That's enough.
So let me ask you a question about the Olympics a little bit. So name an Olympic athlete that is incredibly nice. And then name an athlete. No, not who isn't. Just name. I'm not going to make you say that. I was going to say, give me the dirt. Name an Olympic athlete who was really cool, who you met, who really had. I don't know. It's just like you might like. Yeah, you know what? This person was really cool to work with.
Well, I mean, with what I do, the interaction with athletes is actually very small. Like last week, we did a ton of calls with a bunch of the US figure skaters, and they're all incredibly nice. I will say figure skaters are far more verbose than gymnasts. So figure skaters are kind of easier to work with in that case. But,
Really?
you know, in Olympics, like you'll talk with them a little bit and then you're kind of building a whole case around them. I've worked a lot with gymnasts because I do have this documentary series. So, I mean, I would say one of the most, you know, I had a lot of fun working with Chelsea Memel last summer. Like she was just really fun to work with, and her dad was a blast. And I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to kind of craft an entire narrative around her and her journey. So, I mean, like just in terms of like how much I've worked with her, Chelsea was definitely one of my favorites.
That's cool. Stacey, who in your life, have you had any people that have really influenced you from a professional and personal? I mean, some strong influencers?
Yeah, I mean, the person that I mentioned before, John Kordsmeyer, he was the president of the Northwestern Mutual Foundation, and I was the creative director for that childhood cancer foundation. He was so influential because I guess it goes back to that trust thing. Like I knew he trusted me, and if I brought an idea to him, he was really going to think about it, and he was going to challenge me and try and figure out like, what haven't you poked a hole in yet? So I knew that he was taking me seriously. I knew that he had my back should it not work out, which sometimes creative stuff doesn't work out. But I also knew that like, if he said, yeah, I believe in you, go ahead, that like I had his full support. And it meant the world. It meant the world to have somebody support me in that way.
Awesome. Stacey, is there anything that you're working on right now that you want to plug? Anything cool that you just want to talk about?
I mean, I guess the thing that I'm working on the most right now is definitely the Olympics. So I guess tune in every weekend, NBC Grand Prix, check it out, skating.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What questions do you wish Pat would have asked you?
Because I got him. I got him right here.
What questions? What questions did we not ask you that we should have, or anything? That the floor is yours for a final comment.
I want to hear Pat's questions now.
Yeah, Pat. Well, Pat, talk about research, Pat.
Yeah. No, I guess my last question.
Research. I did my research.
My last question for you would be just who do you admire that's out there? You told me some movies that you liked, but like brands that are like doing this on a regular basis, right? And let's try to stay away from maybe some of the obvious ones, you know, your Nikes, your Apples, what, you know, corporate brands, or even there's so many great, I think, individual influencers who are really, you know, developing their own personal brand. Who are people that you look at go, yeah, this man, woman, whoever is really doing it well?
Man, I'm so all over the place, like with what I like and with what I watch. I mean, I think it's really important to pay attention to TikTok. I think that is, I don't think that as advertisers we should be sleeping on like TikTok and the importance of how those messages are being shared and how advertising can potentially use it. I think something that's like really interesting that I've kind of just been watching for a while and I've always been interested is this vlogger, Emma Chamberlain. She's huge with the teenage girls, and she's evolved her style from this very quick, quirky, like, oh, I'm just such a weird girl. Ha ha ha. Look at me. I have acne. I'm funny. Like she's evolved in this style to like somebody new is editing her videos and they're giving her guidance or she's figuring it out. And now it's like her videos are very like kind of still. And she's just talking to the camera and it's very intimate. And she's just had this progression and I find it fascinating. I don't know what it means. I don't know how it's going to influence anything, but I think that like paying attention to those trends of like what teenagers are watching and looking at. I mean, I sound like an old man right now, but it is going to be really important of like, people are consuming so much content on their phones. Don't underestimate the fact that people will sit and watch a 10-minute video on their phone. If it's good and it's interesting, they're going to watch a movie on their phone. So, just kind of paying attention to like TikTok and trends that you're seeing and how influencers edit their vlogs with a lot of quick jump cuts and interesting things. And I incorporate that a lot. I pay attention to that stuff a lot.
Awesome.
Interesting. So as we wrap up here, Pat, I read on Stacey's bio that she's incredibly competitive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's competitive. You know, she doesn't like to lose.
Yep.
That's not
I've never seen that out of Stacey because I've attended, and again, full disclosure, I've attended a few Oktoberfests with Stacey, and she seems. I've never seen the side of her, but I'm gonna start watching. So we're gonna play a little round of Olympic trivia with her.
Okay, if this doesn't go well,
because I heard that you know everything, right, about the Olympics. So
yeah, I do.
All right.
I do, and yeah, again, I know how to hang up. Oh, it's a bad connection. Going through a tunnel.
All right. I'm gonna toss one your way.
Okay.
So, what famous Winter Olympic sport was initially introduced as a summer sport?
Oh, I hate you.
No, you don't.
I feel like this happened back in the 40s or 50s, and that it was like, it wasn't hockey. It wasn't, like, I want to say it was like a running thing. Hockey?
You are very, very close.
Like a biathlon running thing.
We talked about it earlier. It's one of the two sports we were talking about.
Was one of the two sports I was talking about? Gymnastics or figure skating?
Bingo. It was figure skating.
No.
Yeah, it's figure skating was initially a part of the Summer Olympic Games.
What year?
I don't have the year. I will get back to it. And
you know what? No, that's not true. That can't be true because ice needs to be frozen, and they only had indoor Olympics.
And we are breaking up, folks. We are breaking up.
Because you know what? Dick Button competed outside in the Olympics. You know what? I don't like this question.
Look at I started. If I'm wrong, that's what I'm saying. Now, what I didn't say is that it might have been a summer game and a winter's, but anyway, Stacey, this has been a lot of fun. It's been awesome. What's it?
That's the only question?
Oh, I'll ask you one more. Let's do one more. All right, let me see. I got one more for you.
Now I'm mad and I'm fired up.
I know you are.
Stacey, anytime you could work Dick Button into the conversation.
Okay.
That's money.
Actually, my best career highlight was when I was that runner for ABC Sports. Dick Button found me and he decided that I was like his little person who was going to do all this stuff. And one of the things that he did was he sent me back to his hotel room to search through his trash to find his notes for the Ladies Long program that night. And you know what? I did it.
What else was in there?
I'm going to ask you one more.
This is other documentary.
This is it. I got one more. This is it. Now we're done, and I promise we're done. What country in the Southern Hemisphere has hosted the Winter Games?
Oh no. What country is it? I hate this. I'm going through a tunnel. I'm breaking up. What country in the Southern Hemisphere has not Australia? I don't know. I give up. Brazil? Mexico? Korea?
Trick question. No country.
Oh! Why didn't I
no
say
country.
that?
I'm reading these off here. So
all right.
Anyway, we will play Trivia Pursuit some other time, but I will say, in all honesty, this has been great. Stacey, thank you for sharing your time with us. It was a great conversation. We appreciate having you on. If people want to find you, how can they? We'll also put it in our post credits, but what's your website?
My website is nashrightnow.com, nashrightnow.com, and all of my contact information is on there.
We will make sure we include that in the post credits. Stacey, this was a lot of fun. We thank you. This was Over a Pint with Stacey Nash. Cheers.
Cheers.